Tom Zutaut here at Can You Get Me In? If you're here, that means you're already in. Wow. We're halfway through January of 2025. Last year ended with hurricane winds. This year started with fires out in California. And then we had a snowstorm. And following that, we got hit by a hailstorm, the Lizzie hail kind of storm. More on that later. First off, I wanted to thank everybody for watching the last episode, episode 6, and please like, subscribe, follow. I'd love to get some comments. We've gotten a few comments, and I know people have questions, and we're working on a plan to come up with a live show where we can answer your questions. But anyway, back to the last episode. So with Ben Vanderhart from Yellow Racket Records, we sat in his record store and we talked about these musical trends, one of which was people looking for a more acoustical kind of sound and a lot of genre bending and personal music experiences. And so right after we finished filming that episode, we went over to the Signal in Chattanooga. It's a venue, and Lizzie Hale was doing an unplugged thing there. And we walked in there about 20 minutes after she started because we ended a little late on that episode with Ben. But anyway, when we walked in, it was unbelievable. It was sold out. It was packed. The balcony was packed. And we walked straight in, and there was Lizzie Hale over this way on the piano. And Joe Nottinger, her guy, was, playing an acoustic. And the stage was set up like their living room. I mean, it was so cool. There was a sofa, a piano bench, and some chairs, and a bunch of lamps. It was kind of like you were in their living room, watching them kind of banter and talk back and forth and talk about the songs and then play a song, talk some more, play a song. And one of the cool moments was, she said to Joe, she said, "Hey, come sit next to me on the couch and let's talk for a minute." And then they went into a song that was just great. And, I'll tell you what about Lizzie Hale. Hearing her songs so stripped down and intimate, and it suddenly dawned on me that we walked straight into what Ben was saying about this, personal music experience, because it's like you're in their living room. And next week, we're going to go see Kevin Kinney from Driving and Crying sitting in his living room on stage at the Barrel House Ballroom. But, as for genre bending, what's really cool, and Ben was telling me how people come in to buy Taylor Swift, Misfits, and Metallica all at once, the same person. But Halestorm, they did a collaboration with Brooks and Dunn, and they did Boot Scootin' Boogie. And I mean, people are not like stuck on one kind of music. If you want to know more about that, go back to the last episode 6. Anyway, I have so many stories, and I look forward to sharing more and more of them in each episode. I know there's a lot of y'all that want to hear about Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue, and some of you want me to go live and answer questions, and all that's coming in the future. But, I was reading the music news, and I like to keep up with the music news and what's going on. And for instance, John Sykes, who was in Thin Lizzy and Blue Murder, he passed this week. And then I saw this article where 3 handwritten pages of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man lyrics sold for $500,000. I mean, who could write 3 pages and sell them for $500,000? Well, only Bob Dylan, right? Because Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I mean, this is the only guy in the history of the music business, a guitar player, a songwriter, harmonica player, a musician, a singer. I guess we could call him a singer. Some people might want to debate that. But anyway, so here is this guy in these 3 pages sell for that money. And I've got a story about Bob Dylan, and I'm going to tell it in a second. But for those of you who maybe have not heard of Bob Dylan, if you want to get one record and learn why this guy won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I'm telling you right now, this is a 5-album set. I'm sure it's on CDs too. You can stream it. But this has all the songs that matter. And I highly recommend it. And I'm going to show you a couple of more. This is the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. And yes, he wrote, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The girl from the North Country, a hard rain's going to fall. Don't think twice. It's all right. And I'm not a good singer. But I'm going to grab a couple more. And if you just want a quick trip to the early stuff, you know, this is Bob Dylan's greatest hits. And it has those same songs. It also has like a Rolling Stone and Mr. Tambourine Man. And it's in mono. And so mono is where you have your stereo and both speakers put out the same music. So it's all mono, right? It's a wall of sound. Stereo is where you hear like a drum beat here, a guitar here, a bass in the middle, a tom hit there, there. And it's more realistic, like you're actually sitting in the room. And I love the punch of mono. I'm kind of like a person that likes to listen to stuff in mono. And here's Bob Dylan bringing it all back home. It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding. It's all over now, baby blue. I love those songs. It also happens to be in mono, of course. You can find mono streaming as well. Yet another side of Bob Dylan, and this was his big comeback record that he did for David Geffen and Planet Waves. And then lastly, this is one of my favorites. It's Blood on the Tracks. It's one of the later records. Anyway, so now to my story, and I have a couple of Bob Dylan stories, and reading him selling those pages for $500,000, it made me remember a couple of times where my life intersected with Bob. So I'm working at Geffen Records for David Geffen, and I am sitting at my desk, and my office door opens up, and this guy wanders in, and just to give you an idea of, my office was literally right on Sunset Boulevard. So my window, past my window, is about 8-foot wide sidewalk and then Sunset Boulevard. So, you know, people did wander in every now and then. I mean, it wasn't that hard to get to me, you know, being that exposed. So this guy walks in and he kind of looks like a bum, you know, or a homeless person. They got a lot of those out in Cali. So anyway, you know, I'm sitting there and this guy, like, he starts touching the wall, right? Like he's feeling and touching the walls and, you know, walking around, and he's mumbling stuff like, hey, Joe, hey, what are you? And I'm hearing all this mumbling, right? And I'm thinking, man, this is pretty crazy, but it's not like when you live on Sunset Strip that you don't see a lot of crazy stuff. So anyway, then he starts walking towards me, and he looks at me, and he's like, "Hey, David, I gotta do that." I mean, it's a lot of mumbling, you know, but I did recognize him say something like David, and then as I looked at his face as he got closer to me, I'm like, shit, I think that's Bob Dylan, you know? I mean, he must be off his freaking rocker. I don't know what the deal is, but I just kind of sit there and I nod my head. Yeah, man, it's cool. Yeah. You know, and he's still calling me, yeah, David, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever you need, man. Walk around and, you know, let me help you any way I can. And he finally leaves. And I pick up my phone and I call David Geffen's office and I'm like, David, I swear, I think Bob Dylan just walked into my office. And David goes, oh yeah, Tom, I forgot to tell you, man, like Dylan will sometimes wander into your office because that used to be my office, and I don't know if he's having like acid flashbacks or whatever it is, but he tends to wander into the office when I was managing him where we would have our meetings. And I should have warned you when I gave you my old office. And I was like, damn, but that was Bob Dylan. And, over the 10 years I worked at Geffen, I mean, Bob Dylan, he wandered in 4 or 5 times and did the same thing. It was like a broken record. And, this kind of made sense to me later. I was, reading news like I read the news, and Bob Dylan got arrested for walking into someone's yard and trying to get in their house in New Jersey. And they had no idea who he was. And so he was arrested. The police chief came out, and he saw that it was Bob Dylan. He goes, what's all the fuss? It's just Bob Dylan, like he's royalty, And I also then read that he was actually looking for this guy's house. He was looking for Bruce Springsteen's house because, apparently he wanted to see where Bruce Springsteen recorded Born in the USA and Born to Run. And, of course, at another house in the same neighborhood is where Springsteen recorded Nebraska, which is my favorite Springsteen album because it's all unplugged. I mean, we're talking about these personal, intimate experiences. Well, Dylan has given us a bunch of them. And Springsteen gave us Nebraska, which was him and a tape recorder in a house, strumming his guitar and singing songs. And, I'll never forget that song, Atlantic City. I play it over and over again. But anyway, so I read some more and I find out that Dylan was also nearly arrested in Liverpool looking for John Lennon's house. And when he was in Toronto, he was looking for Neil Young's house. I mean, he should have been looking for Joni Mitchell's house too, but I mean, I'm just saying. So Dylan has this thing, whether it's an acid flashback or whatever it is, where, he has his heroes, right? Because we all have heroes. So Springsteen is a hero to Dylan, Neil Young was a hero to Dylan, and John Lennon was a hero to Dylan. Those were his contemporaries. So, I mean, he's looking for their houses, I mean, where's Waldo, right? So now we'll flash forward, about 10 years ago, my mom passed, and when we read her will and her wishes, one of her wishes was she wanted someone to sing Knocking on Heaven's Door. So Knocking on Heaven's Door is another one of those amazing Dylan songs. In fact, GNR did a great version of it. And my mom loved that version. Her other favorite song was the GNR original Patience. But anyway, so the night before we're going to bury my mom, we're at this micro whiskey distillery. They do gin too. It's called Valentino's, and it's in Ferndale, Michigan. Ferndale is right at 8 Mile Road on the border with Detroit, 8 Mile Road being the famous road that Eminem wrote about and was inspired by. So we're sitting there, and my brother says to me, he goes, I think Bob Dylan's over there. And I'm having a flashback of him wandering around my office, and I look over there and I go, yeah, Brad, that's definitely Bob Dylan, And there were other people kind of staring at Bob, but people were being very respectful. And so the manager of the bar comes over, and my brother says to her, because she's going to bring a round of whiskeys for us, and my brother says to her, goes, do you know who that is over there? Like, that you're serving over there? And she goes, no, is that somebody famous? I think I see people staring at him. And, my brother goes, that's Bob Dylan. And, she's probably mid-20s. And she says to my brother, she says, who's Bob Dylan? I said, well, ask your coworkers. So she comes back and she says, my coworkers don't know who it is either. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I mean, these are like all kind of like mid-20-somethings, maybe 30. And I can't believe this guy won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and we're there, and these people that run Valentino's micro distillery bar, and red velvet everywhere, they don't know who Dylan is. So my brother tells her to do a search, and so they search on her phone, and she comes back and she goes, Oh, I can't believe it, man. I can't believe that we didn't know who he was. And I mean, he's iconic, right? And I'm like, yeah, he's definitely iconic. And she goes, well, he just asked us. He wants to take home some whiskey. And of course, later, I found out Bob Dylan puts out his own whiskey. It's called Heaven's Door, for those of you that want to dig deep and get nerdy about Bob Dylan. So he does have his own whiskey brand. And I think that Dylan was researching all these micro distilled whiskeys around the country as he was touring, because the next day he was playing at the Fox Theater in Detroit, which is not that far from this bar. So anyway, we see her get one of each of their 3 whiskeys that they distilled, and she takes them over in like plastic grocery sacks. And he literally pulls his hands back as she hands them to him and lets them fall to the floor. And then he breaks out into a song, and he's singing like, oh, don't give me no dog shit. I don't need no dog poop. And, you know, Bob Dylan, he hardly sings, any song the same twice. And he's going on and on. These bags are for dog poop, and I put my dog's poop in this bag. Don't give me no whiskey with dog poop. And I mean, it was really crazy. Like, he made up this song about how, grocery plastic sacks are for picking up dog poop. And then I remembered when I lived out in California, it was like, yeah, I mean, you always kept your Ralph's or Kroger's grocery bags, and you used them to scoop up the poop, and then you didn't have to buy the poop bag. So anyway, I guess Dylan felt like they were trying to give him whiskey in the bags that you use for dog poop, and it didn't work. So the manager comes over, and she's like, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know what to do. I mean, he wouldn't even like touch the bags. And my brother's like, yeah, out in California where Dylan lives, they use these bags to scoop up their dog's poop when they walk their dogs. And, so he correlated, you're giving them whiskey in a bag used for dog poop. So my brother's like, hey, next door, there's a taco place that has these white paper sacks. You could probably fit 1 bottle in a paper sack. So I'll go out the front door, and I'll sneak back in through the back door, and I'll go get you some white paper bags. I'm sure they'll give them to me. And so my brother comes back with the sacks, and then we watch her, take the paper sacks with the whiskeys, and he grabs them and puts them on his table, and, and he's sitting there. And I said to my brother, I said, hey, Brad, why don't you go see if Dylan will sing at Mom's funeral tomorrow? She wants Knocking on Heaven's Door. He wrote it. He's in town. I mean, he's so weird, he might just say yes. My brother says to me, he's like, well, Bob Dylan. Why don't you ask him? And I'm like, yeah, I know Bob Dylan because he wandered into my office, and the guy who managed Edie Brickell, also managed Bob Dylan, and you said hello to him a couple of times backstage, but I don't really know him. So my brother and I are arguing back and forth about who should go ask Bob Dylan if he'll sing at Mom's funeral. And so we, neither of us would do it. And then all of a sudden, Dylan just grabs his white paper sacks, and the 2 people who were with him, they each grab a sack each, and those 3 white bags with Bob Dylan, exit the venue. And the next day, my daughter ends up singing Knocking on Heaven's Door, for my mom, and it all worked out in the end. But, it's amazing, how life, intersects. And just reading about those Dylan pages selling for $500,000, it made me remember these times that I ran into Bob Dylan, at my office, and then, later the night before my mom's funeral. Can you imagine if Bob Dylan would have sang Knocking on Heaven's Door at my mom's funeral? And as weird as he is, he might have actually done it. So speaking of D's like the Dylan as in Bob Dylan, so I'm also reading the news, and I read that David Lynch died in the California fires, but he didn't die from the fire. He had to be evacuated from his home, and he had bad emphysema and an oxygen tank, and the stress of leaving his home, apparently, he was in such fragile condition that it just, it just, finished him and he passed. But David Lynch was another cultural icon, just like Bob Dylan was in music. David Lynch was in film and TV. He also was an actor and a musician and a producer. And I became aware of David Lynch, and he was one of my heroes. And there's a personal reason, but on a cultural reason, I was a huge sci-fi fan. I read a whole bunch of sci-fi books, as a teenager, and Dune was one of my favorite books. And actually, it was my dad that turned me on to Dune. So I know there's a new series of Dune movies, but the first Dune movie was directed by David Lynch, and it looked different from any other movie I had ever seen. And, it had that sci-fi element, and Kyle MacLachlan was in it, and his name will come up again. But I saw that movie, and he did another movie that really changed my life, and it just impacted me, because in a world of color, here David Lynch puts out a black and white movie. And let's see if you can guess what the movie is. I am not an animal. I am a human being. Okay, I'll give you a second. So if you don't remember that line, it's one of my favorite lines about the human condition, because, it's the Elephant Man. And, the Elephant Man had some pretty big talent in it. It had Mel Brooks produced it, Anthony Hopkins, Anne Bancroft, Sir John Gielgud, Wendy Hiller, and John Hurt played the Elephant Man. So what an incredible movie. And I remember just being, moved to tears by, the art of it. And then David later did Mulholland Drive, which to me captured the essence of Hollywood and, living in LA. And then, so grunge comes, right? And all of a sudden, Guns N' Roses and Dokken and Tesla and all these rock bands become less relevant, because from Seattle and Portland come Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and a bunch, Soundgarden, all these bands. And here's David Lynch making us all wonder, who killed Laura Palmer? How many of you remember who killed Laura Palmer? Twin Peaks, probably one of the greatest shows on television. A real whodunit. It's like the Curse of Oak Island. They're digging and trying to find something. So here we are in the Pacific Northwest. Kyle MacLachlan stars as FBI special agent, and he goes into this diner. That was a damn fine cup of coffee. And he's like, I need a piece of that cherry pie. And it was kind of a thing in every couple of episodes. And, while he's sitting there drinking his coffee and eating cherry pie, he's solving the murder of Laura Palmer. But so many people, were moved by David Lynch's work, and even Bowie. Now, David Bowie really inspired me, and I brought some of his records. And if you haven't heard David live, this is the one with Major Tom, Space Oddity. My favorite song, so David Bowie pays tribute to Andy Warhol, and what a great record this is. And also, there's a song for Bob Dylan on this record. So Bowie had his influences too. I love Diamond Dogs, that's a good one. And I kind of relate to this one because it's Panic in Detroit, where I was born. But anyway, so Bowie, a couple of months before he died, he wrote an essay about how he was inspired by David Lynch. So I promised you a personal story about David Lynch. So about 7 years ago, I got invited to a party at David Lynch's house, and it was like a self-improvement party. And when I say self-improvement, there was like Swamis and Yoganandas and nutrition experts, and they were teaching us yoga things you could do in the morning. And one of the things that was really impactful to me is there was a guy from India that was, talking about how important it is to start your engine in the morning with some kind of an organic dairy product like yogurt, right? And he was telling me how Fage yogurt is the only yogurt sold in the US that is just all like organic natural ingredients. There's no chemicals and no processing in it. Fresh berries, especially, and nuts and raw nuts like walnuts. And, you know, to this day, I still eat yogurt, berries, and nuts in the morning. And, you know, I mean, through this routine, I went from a 48 waist to a 34, and I lost over 100 pounds. And, you know, if I hadn't gone to this event at David Lynch's house and he funded all of these speakers to come and help people, and if you needed follow-up help, you had numbers that you could call. So, you know, in a way, you know, David Lynch not only inspired me culturally with his creative spark, his movies, his shows, he also got Isabella Rossellini to sing Blue Velvet. That was another one of his great movies that I forgot to mention. But all I'm saying is that David Lynch personally touched me and put me on a healthier routine, and I have a better life because of it. And while we're going on in the news, I do have another thing to discuss, and there's so much here, I'm going to have to kind of read some of it. But, you know, the Eagles put up a couple of $1 million in Irving Azoff to create a benefit. And I mean, this tragedy in California, these fires, so they put together a concert called Fire Aid, and it's coming up on Thursday, the 30th of January, and I'm sure it'll be rebroadcast, but I think you'll have trouble watching anything but that, because it's going to stream audio and video almost everywhere. I mean, we're talking Apple Music, Apple TV, Max. We're talking about KTLA Plus, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Prime Video, Amazon Music, Twitch, SiriusXM, Spotify, SoundCloud, Veeps, and iHeartRadio. So I think that it's almost impossible for you to be anywhere and not hear the concert. It is just literally going to be everywhere. And the people that are performing it, so you've got Green Day, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Nicks, Little Baby, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Billie Eilish, Dave Matthews, John Mayer, Earth, Wind and Fire, Gwen Stefani, and No Doubt. For the first time, they've reformed they played since 2015. Jelly Roll, Katy Perry, Pink, Rod Stewart, Sting, and Stephen Stills. And I'm sure there's more that have added on, and this is to raise money for people that lost everything they own. And I did the same. I lost my house in the 93 Malibu fires, and you know, so many people came out to help us, and that was 500 buildings, and this is 15,000 buildings, and as many people as you can imagine, families that lost everything. So I think this is going to be an awesome event. It's streaming almost everywhere, audio and video, depending on where you go. And I'm going to end with a zoo thought, because you know, life can be really ironic, and I've seen a lot of things in my life, and you know, I'm as ironic as anybody else is. But so here's this guy, David Lynch, who smokes 2 to 3 cigarette packs a day, but yet he takes a lot of his money and puts it into a foundation for people to live a healthier life and self-improvement. So, you know, here's a guy who doesn't practice what he preaches, but he created all these incredible movies and shows, and created some, you know, a couple of songs and music, and he did some soundtracks with Angelo Badalamenti. You can search that and learn more about it. But all I'm saying is here's a guy who knocked down his own health through 2-3 packs of cigarettes a day. Ultimately, he gets taken out of his home with an oxygen tank with a bad case of emphysema, and he dies from his dark side. We all have a dark side. So, you know, my thought is that no matter what your dark side is, you can do good things in the world and help other people. And that's what Irving Azoff is doing with Fire Aid. You know, he's helping other people. Anyway, it was great talking to everybody. Please subscribe, like, and follow on whatever social media platform you use.